Good evening, everyone, and on behalf of the Rotary Club of Houston Skyline, as well as District 5890, we welcome you to the second in our series that we are calling Critical Conversations. It is my honor and my privilege to chair the program this evening. We'd like to begin our program with a long-standing Rotary tradition and rituals where we open every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, a brief invocation, and our Rotary four-way test. And to lead us in those traditions, I'm going to ask Dennis Mosley, who is a founding member and past president of the Rotary Club of Houston Skyline, to lead us. Dennis?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. If you would please say with me the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll follow that with a short invocation and the four-way test. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear Father, as we stay focused on the objectives that we have in the world, peace, tranquility, a true brotherhood of man, freedom from hunger, the oppression from sickness, the freedom to choose our own destinies, we affirm our commitment in our simple Rotary four-way test. For all we do and support, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, and will it build better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? We reaffirm our commitment to high ethics in all we do. And we give thanks to all the blessings and opportunities and responsibilities that befall us as Rotarians. We'll continue in this time with optimism, renewed energy, and commitment to serve serve you and our fellow men and women. Please, Lord, help us to serve. Amen.
Thank you, Dennis. I'd like now to introduce our truly exceptional leader and the district governor of 5890, Scott Rainey, who will make a few brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Vicki. Yes, thank you, Vicki, and thank you all for being here tonight. And I'd like to start off and just recognize the committee who is responsible for bringing these critical conversations to you. Of course, our chair is Vicki Brenton, and then the committee members include Dennis Mosley, Sally Hopkins, Gwen Caralla, Donna Burt, Michelle Barrere, and Rebecca Maddox. As you know, the four-way test is, I see it as the playbook for Rotarians. Phrases like fair to all concerned, building goodwill and better friendships, beneficial to all, must be embraced and reflected in our daily lives. A basic premise of these truths is to respect and value one another, to include everyone on an equal and equitable basis. We Rotarians should, as people of action, be leaders in our communities to model this way of life. Houston's the most diverse city in our country, and therefore Rotary District 5890 should reflect this diversity and encompass people of every type. Our district has met the Rotary International goal for female membership prior to the target date. However, the bar was set too low, in my opinion, and we can be the leader in expanding our demographic boundaries. We will reset the bar for the world. Sometimes we need to get out of our comfort zone to effect real change. I've had the utmost respect for our members, and due to that, I know that we can take the challenge to help others with difficult issues. We will do this in a kind and respectful way, living by the guidance of the four-way test. Rotarians connect people, and we're a unique organization that welcomes and includes everyone. I'm so pleased that we're not afraid to be a part of the solution and extend our reach where it will be most impactful. Your thoughts and insights are an integral part of this process. I ask that each of you become actively involved in this effort. Please ask questions, share your thoughts, your aspirations, and your concerns. We'll make a difference with your help. This is the very essence of serving like a champion today. Vicki, would you please introduce our speakers?
Thank you very much, Scott. Both of our speakers are well known in the Houston community and really not a stranger to Rotary at all. But I'm very honored to have them back joining us this evening and to formally introduce both of them. Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, for almost 40 years, has been shaping local thought, ongoing trends in metropolitan Houston. Dr. Kleinberg is the founding director for the Kinder Institute for Urban Research and professor emeritus of sociology at Rice University. Through an annual survey that the Institute has done, they have tracked economic outlooks, demographic patterns, experiences, and beliefs during 39 years of remarkable change in Houston. In 2020, Simon & Schuster released his book that explores the national implications of this research, entitled Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America. Dr. Kleinberg is the recipient of 12 major teaching awards at Rice, a graduate of Haverford College with an MA from the University of Paris and PhD from Harvard. He came to Houston after teaching at Princeton, and we are indeed proud and fortunate that Rice and Houston have claimed Dr. Kleinberg since the early 70s. Larry Payne has 48 years of experience in public service, education, and not-for-profit leadership and religious leadership. His career in public service includes notable positions at the city, state, and congressional levels. He previously served as president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity. His love to serve extends to leadership roles in the Roman Catholic Church in multiple cities, including the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. He is outspoken on education and social justice issues and is the host of a weekly public affairs TV show, Dialogue Houston, now in its 26th season. He was asked by the mayor of Houston to lead the task force on police reform, which just recently released its recommendations. He is the director for race reconciliation and response at the Institute for Spirituality and Health. He is active and honored by multiple organizations, including the Center for Houston's Future and the American Leadership Forum and the University of St. Thomas. One of his newest endeavors is a book, The Heart of Houston, Lessons in Servant Leadership. Larry, you are indeed the consummate servant leader. The floor is now yours. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you, Vicki. And it's so great to be with all the Rotarians around the horn here, those here from the greater Houston area, and I understand those from across the country. And so this is really a wonderful opportunity to have this great dialogue. Tonight, I am proud to have a conversation with a very good friend of over 30 plus years, whom we have developed together a relationship built on mutual trust and respect, the hallmark of any relationship going forward. We're here to discuss his wonderful work over the years in the Houston Area Annual Survey, but particularly the wonderful work, and yes, I must shamelessly plug the book, Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America. As he held up his too, we're both doing it at the same time. One more time, Steve, we could do it. Same time, there we go.
We did it.
All right, I'm in the book, so you know, I got a self-interest in here. It is also a opportunity to realize that what's happening in Houston and why it's so important to have you all around the country on this call. What's going on in Houston, this transformational change, this demographic change, is occurring across this country and will continue to occur in your own cities if it is not there yet. It will happen because it's coming. It is not optional, it is coming. And so when the work we just did here in Houston, I'll hold one more thing up. When Vicki mentioned we just completed our task force report, the task force report on policing, we've gotten requests for this copy of this task force report in Houston, all these wonderful 156 pages, 104 recommendations from across the country, from mayors and police chiefs from across the country. And if you would like to get your hands on it, I'm going to make sure that Vicki has the link. If I already have not sent it to her, I'll send her the link so you can get the link and she can send it to you. It is worth reading. It is a must read at this time in a post-George Floyd reality. At the end of 8 minutes and 46 seconds, this is what needs to happen going forward. So that's where we are. So back to tonight. Tonight, we're going to have a discussion with Steve about what? Democracy. what does it mean to be what does it mean to be a citizen in a democratic society? And just quickly for a review, we know that there are 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in democracy. We love to talk about 2 of those 5, which are what? My individual rights and privileges, because who's that about? It's all about I and me, right? What about the other 3 of the 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy, which are our common duties, obligations, and responsibilities? To whom? The other. We find the other increasingly in our society today, someone different from me, someone who does not look like me, and then therefore there is the other. So there are 3 primary principles for this evening's conversation to keep tucked in your mind as you listen to Steve's wonderful presentation. If you want to go far, you must go deep. Any discussion today about ourselves has to be an honest discussions of where we are before we can talk about where we want to be. And third, nothing can be changed until it is faced. Nothing can be changed until it is faced. So with that context and already the beautiful explanation of the 4-way test, which is why we're all here, because it is about the 4-way test. It is a wonderful opportunity to dive deeply in what the 4-way test means. Just one thing, and Scott did it well in his presentation, just to kind of keep again in your forefront as Rotarians and others on this call. The 4-way test is the ethical standard that applies to our personal, professional, and public lives. Yes, we have all 3, our personal, professional, and public lives. It is a code or standard on which to aspire to adhere to, but it is still in many ways only an aspirational goal. So how do we make it become alive? And it starts with what is truth. Steve Kleinberg has been able for us here in Houston, through his survey, through his words, to his honest prophetic voice, to speak and tell us the truth, to stand up to the truth of what is happening here in Houston, not sugarcoating it, just the reality, just telling us the truth. In other words, he has done this with love. And so we're so happy to have Steve Kleinberg with us tonight to talk about the transformation of Houston and therefore the transformation of America. Steve, is all yours.
Wow, Larry, thank you. Thanks so much. I was going to bring a PowerPoint, but I thought it'd be better to have more of a discussion.
Yes.
So let me just say a few words about where we've come from and why this city may be the most interesting and consequential city in America. I get unfairly credited with having planned to study Houston. It was a one-time survey. I was a young professor at Rice, fell to my lot to teach a research methods class of sociology majors. Back in 1982, Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved into the city between 1970 and 1982, coming at the rate of 1,380 people a week, 230 cars and trucks every day being added to the streets and freeways of Harris County. Greatest boom anyone had ever seen, brought about by the tenfold increase in the value of oil. This was a one-company town. 82% of all the primary sector jobs in Houston in the 1980s were tied into the price of oil. And the price of oil increased tenfold in value between 1970 and 1982, going from $3.20 a barrel, 15, 20, 25, 30. We were building and borrowing on the basis of $60 oil, and this was this booming city, world famous for having imposed the least amount of controls on development of any city in the Western world. Who cares if it's ugly? So what if it smells? It's a smell of money. Come on down. We were a businessman's town. And we did a one-time survey to measure people balancing this incredible growth with growing concerns about pollution, crime, traffic. What kind of city are we building with all this affluence? One-time survey. 2 months later, the oil boom collapsed. The price of oil had gone to $3, from $3.20 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 to 30 to 38. We thought it would go to $50 oil, and suddenly it fell down to $28 by the end of 1983, and 100,000 jobs were lost in this booming town. So we said, my gosh, we better do this survey again. And so for 39 years, we've been taking a representative random sample of Harris County residents, reached by random telephone numbers, so every household gets exactly equal chance to be called, 50% now landline, 50% cell phone, asking people with identical questions over the years, how do you see the world? What is happening in your life? And we have sat back and watched the world change. Houston went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom and then recovered into a restructured economy and a demographic revolution. And these are the changes occurring across all of America. But as I was saying, nowhere more clearly seen or more sharply articulated than in Houston, Texas. So let me just touch on those two central new realities. A new economy where the source of wealth from now on will have less to do with natural resources, which was the basis for the wealth of Houston and Texas throughout all of its history, and more to do with human resources, with knowledge and skills, a world of growing inequalities now, predicated above all else on access to quality education. During the 30 years after World War II, the rising tide lifted all boats. We emerged out of that war, the sole economic power on the planet. All of our potential competitors were decimated by the war experience. It was a world in the 1950s and 60s of big business, big government, big labor. 38% of the jobs in America were union jobs. The unions could negotiate with the corporations to ensure that workers shared in the prosperity of the companies, and the rising tide lifted all boats. Average American man, whatever his education, literally doubled his income in real terms between 1950 and 1970, making more money every year. Those were the years when the big employers in Houston was Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works, good blue-collar jobs for some of the strong right arm and willingness to work hard, booming America, booming blue-collar world. And those were the years between 1946 and 1964 when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. The average American woman between 1946 and 1964 gave birth to 3.6 children on average, and the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generations. So for 60 years, there's been a bulge going through the American system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python. Not very comfortable either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies born in that incredible period after World War II, overwhelmingly Anglo babies, because that's who was here to be born in that period after World War II. The leading edge of those 76 million, the leading edge turned 74 this year. And we are going to watch a literal doubling of the number of Americans over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. Every day, believe it or not, between now and 2030, 10,000 Americans will turn 65. And by 2030, the youngest of those 76 million will have turned 65, heading off into the proverbial sunset, being replaced by a very different generation of Americans. The epic transformation of our times. Meanwhile, the last 35 years after 1980, the economy changed dramatically, and virtually all the benefits of economic growth in the last 30 years in America have gone to the richest 20%, most of that to the richest 5%, most of that to the richest 1% of Americans. There's been a radical redistribution of earnings out of the hands of the poor and the middle class into the hands of the rich and the super rich in the last 35 years. 60% of all American families have found their household incomes stagnating or going down after having doubled in the 30 years before that. What happened? Why did the economy change so profoundly? Two big things happened, and then a total failure to address the issues. Number one, globalization. Companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you are doing a job in America that I can train a third world worker to do, I pay that third world worker $15 a day to do the job. I'm not going to pay you $15 an hour. And if you are doing a job that I can program a computer to do, we're at the beginnings of the robotics revolution, I will soon replace your job with an intelligent machine. We are in a new world where education, always a nice thing to have, has become absolutely essential to a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century. So theme number one, growing inequalities across the board in this city, this state, and this country, predicated above all else on access to quality education. Theme number two is truly remarkable, fundamental, irreversible transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. This is one of the big stories of our lifetimes is that between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this earth who came to American shores, 82% between 1492 and 1965, 82% came from Europe. Another 12% were Africans, originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation amalgam of European nationalities, deliberately so. We were operating under the last 40 years of that period, between 1924 and 1965, under one of the most viciously racist laws the US Congress ever passed, the National Origins Quota Act. And it came out of the great anti-immigrant racist backlash that accompanied the last great wave of immigration when 15.9 million immigrants came to America between 1890 and 1914, coming from Europe, but not coming from Northern Europe. They were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they had no history of democracy. They're coming to take our job and destroy our country. And in 1924, we enacted this incredible act called the National Origins Quota Act that said from now on, only Northern Europeans will be allowed to come to America. The act used the new science of psychology and the IQ test to declare in the act, science has proven that there are 3 subspecies of the white race. The Nordics, who are biologically and intellectually superior to the Alpines, who in turn are superior to the Mediterraneans, and all of them are superior to the Jews and the Asians. And the law codified the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan of 1906, to declare in the act, Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, ineligible from ever becoming American citizens, and Asians were banned entirely from coming to America. Isn't that incredible? Coming out of this racist world of America in the 1920s and 30s. So the law of the land through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It could not survive the shifts of consciousness of the civil rights movements, Jack Kennedy's assassination, and in 1965, Congress changed the law and said, all right, we used to be a racist nation. We're not racist anymore. We're going to give every country recognized by the UN 20,000 visas a year, so get off my back. We're not racist. But we're going to continue the hallmark of American immigration policy, which is family reunification. If you're the father, mother, sister, brother, son, or daughter of an American citizen, you can come to the head of the line. Therefore, said Congress not to worry. The ethnic composition of America isn't going to change because we're going to give preference to people who are related to those who are already here. And then I added another provision. Well, if you're a professional of exceptional ability, and if you have skills that are demonstrably needed in this short supply, you too can come to the head of the line. And in its debates in the 1950s and early 60s, Congress was saying we need to open the door for some more British doctors, some more German engineers. It never occurred to anyone that there were going to be African doctors, Indian engineers, Chinese computer programmers, Filipino nurses who would be able for the first time in the 20th century to come to America. The law was changed in 1965. It's been called one of the great inadvertent acts that the US Congress has ever passed. In a body known for its inadvertent acts and its unintended consequences, we thought nothing would change. Everything changed. During the 1960s, 3.5 million immigrants were suddenly coming to America. Only 38% were from Europe. 1970s, 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, 10 million immigrants per decade have been coming into America. 88% coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And in the United States, and throughout all of our history, been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in the history of the world that can say we are a free people and we come from everywhere. And it's a truly remarkable change, happening at the same moment as the American economy is becoming fully integrated into a single global world economic system, America, a microcosm of the world. Immigration is network driven, so it's not happening at the same rate all across the country. The big immigration capital in terms of sheer numbers is, of course, New York, followed by Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, followed right after Chicago by Houston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and then Dallas, San Diego, Boston, Atlanta, spreading out to every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. This city, throughout all of our history, was a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, take-it-for-granted way by white men. And in the space of the last 35 years, has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. I have this chart I wish I should have brought to show you. In 1960, there were 1.2 million people living in Harris County, Texas. 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, just 6% Hispanics, less than 0.5% were Asians. That was our biracial world. Oil boom years of the 60s and 70s, Anglos were pouring into Houston. After 1982, Houston became the 4th largest city in America. The oil bust occurred, and the Anglo population of Harris County stopped growing. And all the growth since 1982 of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. And this racial southern city dominated by white men has become the single most ethnically diverse city in the country. The census today, final thought, and then I'll stop, I promise, is how do you measure the ethnic diversity of a population? Well, there are 2 ways to do that. One is, what's the percentage of Anglos? The fewer Anglos, the more diverse the population is. A better way, we think, is what's called the entropy index. How close does a population come to 1/4 Asian, 1/4 Latino, 1/4 African American, 1/4 Anglo? Equal force of the 4 great communities of America. And by that measure, Houston just beats out New York to be the most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. If you look at the most ethnically diverse large metropolitan areas, Chicago has too many Anglos, Los Angeles has too few African Americans, Miami has way too few Asians. Houston is where the 4 communities meet in greater balance, greater equality, all of us minorities. All of us called on to build something that has never existed before in human history. A truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and Texas and America as the 21st century unfolds. The other final point I want to make is that the census gives us a picture of the projection for the American population in 2050, and it's a picture of Houston today. We are, for better or worse, where all of America is going to be as the 21st century unfolds. This is where, more than anywhere else, the American future is going to be worked out. And it makes what we do here and the kind of leadership that we can bring and the kind of understanding of these issues of transcendent importance, because this is not just Houston's future we're dealing with. We are the model for what all of America will look like as the 21st century unfolds. How we navigate this transition will have enormous significance as all of us as minorities come together to build the new America, the new Houston of the 21st century. Truly remarkable, fascinating, important city. Watching us come to grips with these issues, we have plenty that we can talk about. I didn't need to give as long a speech as that, but I wanted to touch on those 2 great themes, right, that have made the 21st century a different place than most of us thought it was going to be 20 or 30 years ago. The combination of a new economy where education has become critical and a demographic revolution that has transformed our whole sense of who we are and what it means to be an American. And all of that has come together more clearly, more sharply, more centrally in Houston than anywhere else in the country. So I'll stop there and see what questions, Larry, where do you want to go with all of this? There's a whole lot more to talk about, but thanks for listening. Great to be with you all. Okay, thank you. I can't, Larry, fix your,
Hey, Larry, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
unmute yourself, Larry.
I was listening so much to Steve, I muted myself.
Okay.
Steve, thank you so much. You saw all the hands clapping for this wonderful contextual piece and this wonderful start. I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions so we can have a little conversation. And we're going to open it up to everyone for their questions, so be thinking about your question. And notice I said questions, not statements, not dictatorial statements, just questions. Let me play off, as I've done so many times with you, Steve, over the years in your presentations. We're talking about inclusion tonight. We're talking about acceptance. But the fact remains that Houston is, yes, the most ethnically diverse city in America. It is also the most segregated city in America by income. It is the most gated community in America. But here's where we're going with that. Those are necessarily not negatives, those are just realities. You mentioned a phrase that I think I wanted to go back to, makes a statement. If we all are minorities in this city, which we are, if Hispanics and Blacks want to get excited, you have to call them the new unempowered majority. You may be the majority numerically, but you don't have power, and power is education, and power is resources, and power is money. So you're still the unempowered majority. But language gets in the way here just like we are fighting that language gets in the way with lots of things, including police reform. It never was defund the police. It was reallocate, reimagine, redeploy funds. Do we need a new language to talk about this world we're living in of the majority and the minority, of who the new majority are and who the minorities are now? Do we need new language to describe our realities of trying to live together as human beings going forward? It seems to me that more and more, when we try to get to the truth, to ask what is truth, our language gets in the way because we're talking about a forward-looking description of things using the current and past languages to describe human beings. And it seems to me we need to come up with something better than we have now.
Yes, I agree. Well, and the other key point that you're touching on is that we are falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies, and sort of what is ethnicity going to be in the future? What I tell people is my sense is that the real challenge for the future of Houston and America is not an ethnic divide, it's a class divide. In every community, Anglos, Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians, there's a growing underclass and a growing middle class, predicated above all else, as we mentioned, on education. So that's a key factor. And yet, the other piece, of course, is that the single most powerful predictor among Anglos of comfort with diversity and support for immigration, the single most powerful predictor in our surveys is not education, it's not gender, it's age. Younger Anglos are growing up in a world where they take this diversity for granted. They can't imagine living anywhere else. This is all the richness of our lives. We older Anglos grew up in the 1960s and 70s. That was a different world than the 1990s and 2000s. There's a law of human nature that says what I'm familiar with feels right and natural. What I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. So that's not surprising, I guess, that I tell people you got to be gentle with us old Anglos. This is a big change. You're just taking for granted. You know, so there's a new kind of comfort and, you know, and I mentioned intermarriage. In our surveys of all US-born Latinos who are married in Harris County, Texas, 28% are married to non-Latinos. Of all the marriages involving an Asian across America in the last 3 years, more than 1/3 of all those marriages involve a non-Asian. There's been an 800% increase in Black-white marriages between 1990 and 2015. We are moving into this transracial world where ethnicity will become less and less relevant. Maybe that's what you were getting at. I mean, with ethnic divides make less and less sense, they're going to make even less sense 10, 15, 25 years in the future. The real challenge, can we expand opportunity for everybody?
Sorry, didn't mean to run over you. Since all change is linguistic, we have to keep talking with each other and talking from and learning from each other and growing forward. You know, this thing about truth, I got to go back to truth, and I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful audience. This thing about truth is right now in this reality that we're in this divided nation, in this divided country, the middle of trying to understand what is truth, what passes for truth, what is the understanding of truth, what is truth going back to the four-way test, is it true? And I always remember that little phrase that all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Secondly, is vehemently opposed. And third, it is accepted as being self-evident. And it seems to me that the truth that we're in and this non-truth, what is truth, reality, is going to have to pass through those stages to get to the reality of one of the things you talked about and you speak to so well to. And this one kind of brings it all home for Houston, I think. If you said this, and I'm quoting you, Houston's future is and will be in the hands of the 70% of our population of Houston and Harris County under the age of 20. Let that sink in a minute, people. 70% of the population of Houston and Harris County is under the age of 20. Our future of this city is in the hands of this population. We have no choice but to educate them. Steve talked about the growing inequalities, the ethnic composition being the 2 themes that are really the issue. But we will have no future if we can't get this thing called urban public education right. Steve.
Right. Thank you. Let me clear that up a little bit. Of the 4.9 million people who live in Harris County, of the 1.2 million who are under the age of 20, who will be the voters and workers and taxpayers and citizens of Houston in the 21st century, of everybody under the age of 20. This is because of the baby boom, right? The aging of Anglos, young people disproportionately non-Anglo, of everybody in Harris County, not inner city Houston, not HISD, of everybody in Harris County today under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 9% are Asians, a grand total of 21% of everybody under 20 is Anglo. So two powerful points to make that Larry was touching on. One is 70% of everybody under 20 is African American and Latino. The two groups overwhelmingly the most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public school system. It is a safe statement to make that if Houston's young African American and Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult to envision a prosperous future for Houston, because that is who we are and will be as the 21st century unfolds. And the other point to make is that it's not until you reach people age 63 and older that the majority of people in Harris County are Anglos. As I said, each younger age group, percentage of Anglos come. If African American, Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in this new economy, it is hard to envision a prosperous future for Houston. That is who we are and will be as the 21st century unfolds. I tell people, you can close the borders, build your fence, close off America, round up those 10 million people you think are here illegally and send them wherever you want them to go. Seal off this country so not another immigrant or refugee ever again will be allowed to set foot on this land. Close us off so that we're going to stop all this new diversity that's happening. Close off America. 63-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. I tell people, we'll do the best we can, we'll work on it every chance we get. You can go to the boom on this, right? The bank on this. No conceivable force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more African American, more Asian, more Latino, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. That's the reality that Larry's talking about. That is our destiny. The only question our generation has been given is, okay, how do we make this work? How do we ensure that this diversity becomes a tremendous asset that can be as we position ourselves in the global economy, the gateway to the global marketplace, second largest port in the country, and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart and becoming a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness in the global economy. Much depends on how this generation speaks to this remarkable convergence of the forces that have transformed the world in our lifetimes and before our eyes. And no one expected this. This is not Houston never planned to be the most diverse city. This is our destiny. This is who we are. This is what the cards that we have been dealt. How we play those cards will determine the kind of city, state, and country that we build together in the 21st century.
That leads us right into our first question, which is from Vern Switzer.
Oh,
How does America, he already submitted it to me, so I got it. How does America, Texas, and Houston get to be one nation under God with liberty and justice for all? How do we get there, Steve?
wow. It's hard not to be optimistic, ultimately. I mean, you see this city coming to grips with these things. You see even us old Anglos recognizing, hey, this is what's happening, and this is not a bad thing. There's a psychology of inevitability that says, if something is happening in my world that I don't like, that I would never have chosen, no one consulted with me, but there it is. And it's going to happen, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. The psychology of inevitability, it triggers in the human psyche a rethinking. Maybe this is not such a terrible thing. Maybe I can make money off of this. Maybe we can make this work. And you can see Houstonians increasingly embracing and accepting this diversity. Every single question we ask about comfort with diversity, support for shows increasing embrace over the years. So there's reasons for some optimism, Vern, that we can get there, but it's a real challenge. And you know, there's that old saying, nothing fails like success. Houston was so successful with an ideology of minimum government, minimum attention to public spaces, free enterprise galore, now having to make investments in education, investments in quality of life, investments in building relationships to ensure if Houston has a chance to succeed in the 21st century. This is a city self-consciously reinventing itself. And it's interesting to see that sort of unfold as we go forward. But the real difference, the real message in all of this, I think, is that when we were riding the oil boom during the 1970s, you could not succeed practically. They used to say you could dress a gorilla in a business suit, send him downtown, and he'd become a millionaire in a week. You just were riding this oil boom that was this is the oil age of the industrial era. Houston was just, every time you built a house, it doubled in value. The success of Houston was predicated on the Hughes Tool rig count. What were the number of operating oil rigs anywhere in America meant how successful was Houston being. Today, so it was not anything that any of us had to do to make Houston succeed. Now, Houston's success will depend on us. It will depend on our willingness to invest in education from birth to college, from cradle to career, our willingness to embrace this new diversity and see this mission that we have to build the new America of the 21st century. And you can see signs that we're beginning to understand that. I end the book with saying the jury is out. We are understanding these issues better than we ever have before. We're not yet willing to walk the walk, to make the investments, to ensure that the schools are better than they've been in the past. Another quick thought here is that you didn't need education to make money in Texas. Texas is at the bottom of the 50 states in its spending on education. Houston and Texas are at the bottom. And the reason is you made money out of land, cotton, timber, cattle, sugar, oil. The source of wealth today has less to do with natural resources and more to human resources. And we have to play catch up, and we're way behind. And it's a real challenge, as all of us who are involved in education know. We're just not making the investments that we need to make because the investments have to come from all of us.
Steve, Vicki has a couple other questions for us. Vicki?
My wife always says, answer the question, don't give another speech.
No, actually, we have quite a few questions coming in, and I'm going to present a couple of them, and I'm going to ask our district governor, Scott, also to present. But the first one comes from our fellow Rotarian, John Collier in West University Rotary, and John asked. He says, the very first Rotary statement that's repeated at every Rotary meeting is it the truth? And he wants to know is it the truth? Is this quest for truth useful, or is it meaningless in having engaging conversations about race if the fear of conflict keeps justice and race from being a topic of serious discussion?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the challenge. We're most comfortable when we live in a world made up of what the Wall Street Journal once called PLUs, people like us. And we're used to interacting with people and sharing worldviews. And now we're part of a much more variegated, global, interesting, fascinating, challenging world. And we're still, as Larry was saying, we're among the most segregated cities in America still. So we need to sort of go out of our comfort zone. We need to come to know each other better. We need to develop friendships. Another reason for the optimism that I feel in the surveys is we ask people, do you have a close personal friend who's African American or Black? Do you have a close personal friend who's Latino? Do you have a close personal friend who's Anglo? And in every community, significantly increasing percentages say they have a close personal friend of a different ethnicity. We are falling in love with each other. Every single family in America that is headed by Anglos, 1/3 of all those families have someone who's not Anglo in that family. And so that's a part of this transformation that's going on. And it will facilitate our coming to know each other, to learn from each other, to feel comfortable with each other, and to recognize how much enriched we are by the diversity that is out there, how much more fun it is to be in America. And that sort of thing, I think, is in fact beginning to happen in interesting ways. Not surprising that not everybody's going to be comfortable with this. This is a big, big change. As I say, I tell people, be gentle with us old Anglos. No one asked for this. Suddenly it's a different world. but your children and grandchildren are just sort of, hey, this is who we are. This is what I love about my country. That bodes well for the future, I think.
That brings me to the next two questions I see actually follow your comments. And it's a sort of a two-part. First is, how can we better understand the values and the beliefs of these different cultures to help bring them to the table? And what can we as individuals and Rotarians do to make the transition more successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think you all know that. We need to reach out more. We need to take deliberate efforts to find and identify potential Rotarians who wouldn't ordinarily think of the Rotary as a place where they would be welcome and comfortable, and make sure that they are. I mean, we all have to do that. We all have to take initiatives of various sorts to let especially minorities in this city that have been treated in such an unequal way for so many generations, to say, you're among friends now, and let us see what we can do now. And I think every church needs to, every business adopting a school in this city. The Rotary ought to have all kinds of after school and preschool programs of various sorts. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to take actions that can improve people's lives and bring them into solidarity with us and come to get to know each other in effective and real ways. But it doesn't happen automatically. We're still a deeply segregated city. Our school systems are overwhelmingly African American, Latino. Anglos are 8% of HIS, of the 206,000 kids in HISD. So we don't meet in the schoolhouse. We don't meet in the classroom. We don't meet. If we meet anywhere, it's going to be in the workplace, and we're going to meet in working together to address the challenges of helping this next generation of American kids be prepared to succeed. We all just need to make, each one of us ask, what can each of us do individually and collectively to build bridges and to come to know each other better, and to see what we can do to help, as all of us need to be involved in building the Houston of the 21st century.
District Governor Scott, would you like to, I know you've had a couple of questions presented to you in the chat box. Will you present those, please?
Certainly, thank you. And make sure I was keeping up, because I don't think this one's been asked yet, but Kathy Finninger, she wanted to know, what do you see as the future of education in Harris County, Houston? So many of those who are educated now, unemployed, jobs during the pandemic have shown the importance of blue collar workers.
No, you bet. I mean, it's going to be so fascinating when we go back. We did the last interview for our 2020 survey on March 12th. And on March 16th, the pandemic hit Houston, and we were ordered to close the bars and the restaurants. And so we're going back into the field in February and March of 2021 to be able to have a representative sample of all of us out there. How have we experienced this triple whammy, right? The health pandemic, the economic shutdown, the collapse of oil prices, the growing awareness of the deepening inequalities, the vulnerabilities of so many, the differential degree to which African Americans and Latinos in this city are exposed to and dying from the COVID pandemic, who are essential workers, critical to the lives of all of us, and facing all kinds of terrible risks that the rest of us don't face. So it's going to be very interesting to see how have we been changed by this process, and where's it going to, where are we now compared to where we were a year earlier before the pandemic was around. And I think most of what the pandemic is going to do is to accentuate and underline the inequalities that we've been watching. Right? School, for example, wealthy kids get all kinds of support systems to make sure that they don't lose their schooling, even though when they're operating remotely, and poor kids don't have access to the computers that they need. Their parents are working at two jobs, locked in poverty. They have no choices about how to live their lives. They've got to go out and work. They've got to reach out to other people. I mean, the minority communities are much more overrepresented among those vulnerable occupations. All that is underlining for us what we know is happening, but now is just sort of so unmistakable, the terrible inequalities. I mean, really awful. And we haven't seen that before because the rising tide once lifted all boats. You used to be able to say that if I get rich, I spend money and everyone else gets richer fast. All the data show that virtually all the benefits of economic growth of the last 30 years, virtually all the benefits have gone to the richest 20% of Americans. And 60% of American families have found their income stagnating or going down in the last 30 years. Not because they're not willing to work anymore, because they don't have the right kind of values, but because the economy has changed and now requires education that the rich get and the poor don't. It requires support systems that we middle-class folks automatically produce and provide for our kids that poor parents are unable to do. That's the challenge. And then when you put it all together and recognize that's who we're going to be in the future. Anglos are not going to be, are not making all these babies anymore, right? It tells us this is our assignment. I mean, this is what we've been called on to do. We successful, relatively wealthy people have a call to reach out to others and ensure that we can together build a land of opportunity for everybody.
Vicki, we're getting close to our closing time here, so I want to be true to our schedule.
Well, I have one other question, Larry.
Oh, you have one? Okay.
We actually have several other questions, but several of them follow this theme, and they're asking to direct it to you, please. So you have done such and both of you to answer it, but you both have done such an exceptional job in a very challenging climate, and we can't skirt around that it's a political climate. And both of you do an exceptional job of leading this conversation and this dialogue when many of us are challenged by it. And so the question is, how do we talk to each other with such polarized views and outlooks and experiences and cultures? If you would both could speak to that. People are asking.
Let me say a quick word, and I'll give it to Larry, because Larry's good at closing and something. Yeah, I mean, what I really like about what I've ended up doing here with my life, of doing these objective surveys, is that I can tell people, look, don't blame me. I'm just asking the questions. Here are the answers. This is where we are. These are the changes that are not political, they're the realities. The world is a different place today, and we have to think in new ways. That famous line that's in the book by Abraham Lincoln, as our times are new, so must we think anew. And there's wisdom and knowledge on both sides. But ultimately, we need to come together and recognize that the realities and challenges are there for all of us, and stop blaming each other and start asking, how do we help each other? How do we open doors? And as I say, what is so nice about survey research of this sort is it's absolutely transparent. Here are exactly the questions we asked. I don't like the question either, but there it is. You can see people are answering it differently today than they did. And here's how the sample was drawn exactly the same way in the same 3 weeks of February. If there's a change of less than 3 or 4 percentage points, it could be random fluctuation. If there's a change in the way people answer the question of 8 or 9 points, people are answering those questions differently. We're different folk today than we were. And it's enormously helpful to get away from politics and just ask what's actually happening. And how are people moving and changing? And what does it mean for us? And what are the possibilities that it opens up for all of us as we build together a nation that can work and can be successful in the very different world of the 21st century. Larry?
My 2 quick comments would be this. What got us started on this critical conversation series, we have to remember is the context and the frame. And the frame takes us back to a post 8 minutes and 46 reality. And so now we hopefully have and beginning to have the tools necessary to have the conversations, the dialogue, to have the relationships built so we can have those conversations and dialogue. But remember, the route to the truth and the route to moving forward still passes through the evil of slavery. We cannot get to where we want to go until we have that painful conversation. We can't get to where we want to go unless we discuss more about what racism really means and how it impels itself in American society today. Structural racism, systematic racism, systemic racism. Again, as Steve said, this is not blaming anyone, pointing fingers to anyone. It is not about the past, except recognizing the past creates the present. You can't deal with the future until you have a reckoning with the past and understand how it impacts the present, today. Can't get to there. There is no there. There is no getting to there until you deal with what the reality is of what slavery and racism has done to this country. Not just to Black people, how it has imprisoned white people, what it has done to all of us. And so we cannot just skip over it. We cannot move on. But here's the good news. The good news is that Rotary has a brand. And if anybody can do it, who can be advocates for truth and change, I see it being an organization like you helping others to understand what's at stake, not only for today, but for our children and our grandchildren, and even yet those waiting to be born. This is our pivotal moment. This is our seminal moment to change things for the future. I'll end this way. A crisis like this, with deep challenges to be navigated, will also lead to opportunities for learning and deepening trust with all human beings. And when that trust in the relationship of mutual trust and respect is developed, it in turn will benefit society as a whole, where we start talking about human beings. I'll end this way because this is where it's always needed to go. It's an ethical statement, and since the truth is an ethical statement, what is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? All human beings' lives matter. All human beings are equal. Or they're not. There's no in between. There's no Kamasada. There's no Masamenos. Either you believe that statement, you live that statement every day, and you help make that statement happen in our social, political, and economic lives, in our personal, public, and professional lives. That's what we have to do.
Thank you. Thank you both for continuing to be a part of the conversation and the dialogue that we have in Rotary, because these are issues that we know are important for Rotary to be as relevant as we want to be in Houston, and it's important to our community. And thank you so much for both of you very uniquely have been able to lead us in a great conversation, which we are grateful for. There have been many other questions and comments that I'm sorry that we are out of time to share, but I do want everyone to know that the program was recorded, and we'll be happy to share that link if you would like to share it with others. Several people have asked that we make sure that they get information about Dr. Kleinberg's work, his books, and Larry's work as well, which we will be happy to share and pass on to you. So those of you that have asked for that information and specifically have given us your email or a contact to get the information to you, we will definitely follow up and make sure that you have it. So District Governor, I'm going to give you the final parting words to close us out, and wish everyone a good night, and thank you.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Larry and Steve, for such a great opportunity to share. And that's what we as Rotarians want to do. We just got to, open ourselves up to humility and look how we can help one another. And I see that in each and every one of you that's on this meeting, and I see it around our district. And I know that that's what we can do as Rotarians. We can be that difference. We can bring respect to the table. So thank you all for being here. Vicki, again, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you to the committee. Rebecca, thank you for working behind the scenes to make all the technology work perfect. And y'all go in peace and serve like a champion today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Okay.
Thank
We're
you
going
all.
to see if we can figure out how to leave the meeting.